All right, final concept is income inequality. Income inequality. All right, so income inequality is a market failure because it is there's a disconnect between what we measure as a standard of living and the actual standard of living. We measure something called GDP per capita, which is just our GDP or total income divided by our population as a measure of this quality of life or the standard of living. It's not reality. In reality, the upper quintile or the most small percentage of our population owns a very large percentage of income. That unequal distribution of our income is considered a market failure. We use the Lorenz curve in order to describe and explain this. The Lorenz curve breaks up our population into 5 quintiles, right? So quintile 1 will be the first 20%, that's 1. Quintile 2 will be the second 20%, quintile 3 will be the third 20%, quintile 4 will be the fourth 20%, and then 80 to 100 will be quintile 5. And then we split our income into the same, right? So this is a 20% of the income, 40% of the income, 60% of the income, 80, and then 100. Right? And so whenever the first quintile owns the first 20% of the income right there, that means that we have perfect equality, right? That every single level we are producing, or every 20% of our population owns 20% of the income. It means there's nobody that's super wealthy and there's nobody that's super poor. In other words, everybody has the exact same amount of money. That's perfect equality. That's symbolized by this diagonal curve right there. That's perfect equality. That serves as a reference line for us because perfect equality is impossible to obtain. In reality, our final quintile, which is this curve right here, represents our reality. Our final quintile, quintile 5, owns something like, I don't know, here, about 50%. So 50 to 100, they own this huge quintile of our income. This small group of people own that much of our income as indicated by the intersection of this curve right here and the intersection of it right there, right? In other words, a small portion of our population owns the vast majority of our income. This is far more likely, and that's a market failure. How does the government fix it? Oh, I'm sorry. And the larger the banana or the larger the lemon peel or canoe or hammock or whatever you want to call it, the more unequal we are, right? So this one here is the most unequal, and this one here is the most equal, the closer it is to our reference line of perfect equality. All right, so what's the fix? The fix is a progressive tax. We have 3 types of tax. Progressive tax is where we charge the wealthiest a higher percentage of tax, and the poorest the lowest percentage of tax. So the very wealthy might pay 40% tax, and the very poor will pay 2% tax, for example. So basically, it's like Robin Hood. It takes from the rich in order to provide provisions to give to the poor. Second tax is a flat rate tax, which is everybody pays the same percentage. So the first quintile pays 10%, the fifth quintile pays 10%, right? No matter what income they get, they're paying the same percentage of that income. And then finally, we have the regressive tax, which is where the very poor pay a very high tax and the very rich pay a very low tax. Right? And in reality, that is not commonly practiced, even though sometimes it ends up being the case with some of the loopholes that we've got. Right? So anyways, what do? We do a progressive tax, which takes from the wealthy. Now we have all this money. What do we do with the money? We do transfer payments to the poor. Transfer payments to the poor is basically welfare, food stamps, assistance programs, joblessness or unemployment benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, right? These things that we give to people who are struggling and poor, those are considered transfer payments. And when that happens, we call that redistribution, it shrinks our Lorenz curve, gets us closer to perfect equality, shrinks the size of the hammock, and as a result, gets us closer to equality and helps us fix this problem. One thing you need to know about this is the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient is the difference between A, we take A and we divide it by A and B. So if area A is 0, then we divide 0 by A and B, this whole area, then it's going to be 0. In other words, this line right here, there is no area A. It's that line, we're at perfect equality. But if this whole entire thing is the Lorenz curve, right? That giant thing where A is equal to A and B. Then we divide that out. If A is 100 and A and B is 100, 100 divided by 100 is going to be 1. And that means we are perfectly unequal. That's important because the higher the Gini coefficient, the lower it's going to be. And you can see these or the higher the coefficient, the more unequal it's going to be, sorry. And so you can see this in a couple of ways, right? I can see a Gini coefficient as 0.1, which is highly equal, or that same one would be 10%. Or I could see 0.2, or I could see 20%. Two different ways to say the same thing. All right, that is income inequality in the Lorenz curve, and the last of our concepts.